see the market tumbling, consumer confidence is down, and if he continues on with this, assembly plants in Michigan will shut down and around the country, whoever makes autos, and as well as businesses. They're going to hurt. And these pensions, when the market goes down, it's going to affect people's pensions. So I'm not too sure why he continues to attack his closest friends and allies, but we need the American people to speak up. We need those CEOs to actually get a backbone and stand in front of them and tell them this is going to be a disaster. It's mass chaos right now. That's what we need.
In the latest news on the tariff war, Canada's bold move has shocked the United States, and no one saw this coming. Donald Trump has threatened to escalate the global trade war with further tariffs in Canadian goods, and Canada has said that they would retaliate even more. Who's going to win in this tug-of-war between Canada and the U.S.? Let's find out. But before we start, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Trump threatens further tariffs as Canada retaliates.
President Donald Trump has increased tariffs on steel and aluminum imports to 25%, promising that the taxes would help create U.S. factory jobs. The pain won't just be felt by foreign steel and aluminum plants. The tariffs will likely drive up costs for American companies that use the metals, such as automakers, construction firms, and beverage makers that use cans. Trump has separate tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China, with plans to also tax imports from the European Union, Brazil, and South Korea by charging reciprocal rates starting April 2nd.
Trump has placed 25% duties on all U.S. steel and aluminum imports, and once this took effect, Trump had said that he would impose additional penalties if Canada follows through with its plan to impose counter tariffs on U.S. goods. Canada is the largest supplier of steel and aluminum to the EU, and so imposing a 25% tariff on all foreign imports will greatly affect the trade between the two countries. This would lead to increases in consumer prices, but Trump says that he's protecting American manufacturers. Trump has been hyper-focused on tariffs since his administration started, rattling investors, affecting consumer and business confidence, and raising recession fears. Trump's actions have affected the U.S. relations with Canada, which is a close ally and a major trading partner. For one, Trump has been threatening to annex Canada as another state of the USA. This has been very offensive to the neighboring country, especially since the USA and Canada have been very close partners for many years.
Today, I am announcing that the Government of Canada, following a dollar-for-dollar approach, will be imposing, as of 12:01 a.m. tomorrow, March 13, 2025, 25% reciprocal tariffs on an additional $29.8 billion of imports from the United States.
Canada is the biggest foreign supplier of steel and aluminum to the United States, and it announced retaliatory tariffs on these metals after the USA made their move. Canada has already said that the tariffs that the U.S. impose would be met with retaliations of the same kind. Canada is also preparing for economic disruption right now, and its central bank has already cut its interest rates. Meanwhile, the Americans are more concerned about these recent actions. Americans think Trump is being too erratic in his efforts to protect the U.S. economy, and they are also concerned that the tariffs will make purchases even more expensive.
The main source of the fentanyl is outside of Canada and the United States.
And that is?
It's through a collaboration of people in China and Mexico. So that puts Canada and the United States together, sort of on the same side.
Meanwhile, Trump has been making exaggerated claims about Canada as it imposes more and more tariffs. Trump has exaggerated the size of the U.S. trade deficit with Canada and how much fentanyl is coming over the northern border. He also suggested that Canada had unfairly put tariffs over 200% on American dairy products in the previous administration, but this was proven to be untrue. Canada threatens to cut U.S. electricity.
Premier Doug Ford says he will turn off the power supply to 3 U.S. states, this in protest of President Trump's recently imposed tariffs. Ford's government is already committed to applying a 25% surcharge on energy exports to New York.
And the president put out a statement after seeing those comments and said that it would be there would be grave consequences imposed on Canada if they think about shutting off electricity for the United States of America and our citizens. And the president is also determined to ensure that we are depending on American electricity, not the electricity production of foreign nations, including our allies in Canada. As for conversations, there is continued correspondence between the president's team, particularly Secretary Lutnick, and the Canadians as well.
In recent moves during this trade war, Canada has threatened to shut off electricity completely for the U.S. if Trump continues with his trade war. At first, Ontario Premier Doug Ford had threatened to cut off the U.S. energy supply in a shocking move that would change how this trade war would end.
He lashed out at Ontario's surcharge on electricity to the U.S., saying, "Can you imagine Canada stooping so low as to use electricity that so affects the life of innocent people as a bargaining chip and threat?" He added, they, Canada, will pay a financial price for this so big that it will be read about in history books for many years to come.
States like Michigan, New York, and Minnesota rely on electricity from Canada, and this latest threat could affect 1.5 million Americans by leaving them with no electricity or higher electricity bills. Ford has announced that he would move forward with the 25% surcharge on electricity exports to these three states. But he further warned that if the U.S. adds new tariffs on Canadian goods, he will cut off the electricity completely.
Ford says Ontario provides electricity to about 1.5 million homes and businesses in New York, Michigan, and Minnesota, and he expects this to cost those homes and businesses 400,000 Canadian dollars, or 277,000 in U.S. dollars, daily, and at an average of 100 Canadian dollars, or $69 U.S., a month to the bills of everyday Americans. Ford said, quote, "For weeks now we've been faced with so much uncertainty from President Trump, and vowed he won't hesitate to increase the tariffs or stop supplying electricity to the U.S. completely."
Adding a 25% surcharge on electricity exports will add about $69 US or 100 Canadian dollars per month to the electricity bills of Americans. But at the same time, this would hurt Canada's energy industry. Canada is highly dependent on U.S. exports than America is on Canadian goods. So there are risks of Canada being plunged into a recession if the trade war escalates. Aside from his threat to cut electricity off completely, Premier Ford has said that he might raise the 25% surcharge if the U.S. tariffs escalate. But it seems like the U.S. will do just that, as he plans to levy dairy and lumber tariffs on Canada. The U.S. will match dollar to dollar the duties that Canada has been placing on U.S. goods. Trump has also said that the tariffs on Canada and Mexico could increase if they don't reduce the amount of fentanyl that crosses over the border into the U.S. But Ford and other Canadian officials, including the President Justin Trudeau, are not planning to relent and would continue to fight tariffs with tariffs. U.S. threatens 50% for tariffs.
That in response to the Premier of Ontario placing a 25% tariff on electricity in certain states, that he is going to be responding, as you mentioned, with increasing tariffs on steel and aluminum from 25% to 50%. He also argued that those are going to go into effect starting tomorrow morning. He also said he would soon be declaring a national emergency on electricity within the threatened area.
Trump has made a new threat against Canada, planning to impose 50% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum along with the general 25%. This shocking threat came just after Ontario made a decision to slap the 25% tax on electricity exports to the U.S. Trump announced his plan to double import duties on Canadian metals after this.
And he went on to say that if he does not like what Canada does, if he does not like how they respond, he will significantly increase tariffs on automakers and cars coming into the United States from Canada. And he added as well, he said this, which I found very notable, quote, "The only thing that makes sense is for Canada to become our cherished 51st state," just continuing on with that taunt.
This marks the latest twists and updates in the intense trade war between the U.S. and Canada. Trump has been adding fire to the conflict by calling for Canada to be absorbed into the U.S. as the 51st state, but it seems like these retaliations might not end between the two countries. At first, Trump had placed the 25% tariff on all aluminum and steel imports from foreign countries, including Canada. In response, Canada threatened 25% surcharges on electricity. And now the U.S. wants to up the stakes with a 50% tariff.
Doug Ford pulled back or suspended the energy surcharge, and that was able to stop the 50% tariff that Donald Trump had threatened. But the original 25% tariff is still going ahead. Doug Ford announced that he does have some meetings with Howard Lutnick. Donald Trump showering compliments on Doug Ford in this moment. But at the end of the day, after all of that back and forth, the confusion, the uncertainty, the jitters for investors, Donald Trump is sticking with his original plan for 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum.
Less than a day after making that threat, President Trump announced that he no longer has plans to raise tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum imports to 50%. This was after a conversation between Ford and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Recently, Trump had called Canada a longtime tariff abuser, saying that the United States is not going to be subsidizing Canada any longer. We don't need your car, we don't need your lumber, we don't need your energy, and very soon you will find that out. U.S. dependence on Canadian goods.
At this point, what would it take for you to remove that surcharge on the electricity coming into the U.S. from Canada?
Well, doubling the tariff on aluminum, the U.S. only can manufacture 16% aluminum that they need. The balance, for the most part, comes from Quebec, over 65%. It's going to hurt your manufacturing. You need the aluminum. You need our high-grade nickel. And I want to send more high-grade nickel. You need our electricity. You need the 4.3 million barrels of oil that gets shipped down. I want to make sure we build an AMCAN fortress, the two greatest countries in the world. Fighting like this does not make sense.
When Premier Ford discussed Trump's 50% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, he highlighted America's dependence on Canadian aluminum, nickel, electricity, and oil, stressing that it's necessary for both countries to cooperate and maintain strong U.S.-Canada relations. The United States and Canada share one of the most integrated and mutually beneficial trade relationships, especially in the energy sector. Canada exports millions of barrels of oil per day, and 97% of this goes to the United States. Meanwhile, the electricity grids of Canada and the U.S. are highly integrated, leading to a seamless exchange of power. In 2023, Canada exported 49.4 terawatt-hours of electricity to the United States, valued at $4.3 billion. This exchange is being affected now during this sudden trade war. Canada is a major producer of nickel and aluminum, both of which are important to U.S. industries. These include the automotive, aerospace, and manufacturing industries. But the latest tariffs would affect how much the U.S. can get from Canada. The recent trade tensions are testing the resilience of U.S.-Canada relations. Canada had implemented $20 billion in counter tariffs targeting different U.S. goods. Canadian officials have criticized the U.S. actions as disrupting their long-standing trade partnership. The latest developments in the tariff war between the U.S. and Canada show how intricate their economies are, especially in critical sectors like energy and manufacturing. The two countries have always maintained strong bilateral relations, but Trump's latest moves are harming both countries. It seems like the saying is right: no one wins in a trade war. How tariffs will harm both countries.
But also, as your piece noted, there's all kinds of manufactured goods that go across the border, sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 times. And that's all making financial sense on the part of businesses who plan their supply chains this way. And all of these things are going to take a hit, and all of these things are going to stack up for consumers on both sides of the border, because, of course, your government has put in place a tariff on Canadian goods, and we've now responded by putting a tariff on American goods. And so the end result is that consumers on both sides of the border can pay higher prices. But there's going to be all these sort of knock-on effects. Again, lost shifts, plant closures, and fewer Canadians and Americans going across the border.
The latest escalation of tariffs between the U.S. and Canada is causing a lot of harm to both economies. The U.S. might be trying to protect its local economy and warn Canada to strengthen its border security, but it's also harming itself as it pushes Canada towards a recession. The latest 25% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum imports have disrupted the manufacturing sectors in both countries. These tariffs are increasing production costs for industries that are reliant on these measures, like automotive and construction, and have led to higher prices for consumers on products like vehicles and housing. It has also led to volatility in the stock market. In retaliation, the 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S. states, including Minnesota, New York, and Michigan. This would affect about 1.5 million American homes, causing them to spend about $100 more on their electricity bills. Doug Ford has said that he regrets the impact on American consumers, but he has no choice to respond to the U.S. trade policies. The tariff dispute has strained the strong diplomatic ties between the U.S. and Canada. Canadian leaders have been highly concerned over the U.S. administration's approach, including the current president, Ontario Premier, and even the candidates for the Prime Minister position.
President Trump thinks Canada will cave in. We will never, ever bow down to a bully.
For instance, Mark Carney, the Prime Minister-designate, has shown deep concern, saying that it's a significant threat to Canada's sovereignty and economic stability. He has vowed to continue with the retaliatory tariffs until the U.S. shows respect and fairness in trade relations. The public sentiment in Canada has also been badly affected, with higher anti-American feelings that have caused Canadians to boycott American products and travel. The shift in public opinion has complicated efforts to solve the trade disputes. Recession will be self-made by Trump Ontario.
And if we go into a recession, it's self-made by one person. It's called President Trump's recession, which shouldn't be this way. We should be booming, both countries right now.
The president has insisted that Americans will be better off in the long run because of these tariffs, but he's also acknowledged there will be some economic pain. And when asked directly if it could lead to a recession, he declined to rule it out.
Premier Doug Ford has criticized President Trump's recent tariffs on Canadian goods, saying that they could lead to a self-inflicted recession in Canada. All these tariffs on Canadian imports by the U.S. are posing threats to Canada's economy, leading to a recession. According to analysis by Oxford Economics, these tariffs could cause Canada's FDP to contract by about 2.5% from peak to trough by early 2026, leading to the loss of over 150,000 jobs. The manufacturing sector, especially the automotive industry in Ontario, would be significantly affected. What's more, 8.8% of Canada's workforce is directly involved in the exports to the U.S., so the repercussions would extend across different industries, including services like arts, food, and entertainment. And we will also see a decline in consumer confidence and spending decline. Economists from the Royal Bank of Canada recently warned that these tariffs would be the most significant trade shock since the 1930s. It could even erase Canadian economic growth for up to 3 years if the U.S. continues with its tariffs. America's tariffs against Canada is driving up consumer prices, and prices of perishable goods like fruits and vegetables could rise significantly. Even durable goods like automobiles and appliances would have gradual price hikes. This inflation would strain household budgets.
However, in recent months, the pervasive uncertainty created by continuously changing U.S. tariff threats have shaken business and consumer confidence. This is restraining household spending intentions and businesses' plans to hire and invest. Against this backdrop, and with inflation near the 2% target, the Governing Council decided to reduce the policy rate a further 25 basis points.
The Bank of Canada might have to implement monetary easing measures, including interest rate cuts, to stimulate the economy. But the effectiveness of these policies will remain limited if consumer confidence in the economy remains low due to the tariffs.
Canada, and there's a great deal of frustration and a great deal of anger. Travel to the United, you can see it's winter here. Canadians like to go to Arizona or Florida, watch some spring training this time of year, and travel by Canadians to the United States destinations, Vegas, etc. It's down by about 18%. So big tariff whiplash up here, and it's likely going to get worse because remember, Canada and others around the world are responding with retaliatory tariffs today because of these steel and aluminum tariffs. But America had put some tariffs on Canadian goods a couple of weeks ago, and we've already got retaliatory tariffs on about $30 billion Canadian of American import.
And let's not forget how much Canadians hate Trump now, especially after he called Canada the 51st U.S. state. It has aggravated tensions between the two countries, making it hard for them to carry on with mutually beneficial outcomes. There's no telling whether Canada and the U.S. can resolve these disputes, but it all relies on Trump taking a step back to avoid pressuring these countries. The EU plays its part.
The European Union must act to protect consumers and business. The countermeasures we take today are strong but proportionate. As the United States are applying tariffs worth $28 billion, we are responding with countermeasures worth 26 billion euros. This matches the economic scope of the tariffs of the United States.
Canada and Mexico are not the only countries involved in a tariff war with the United States. The European Union has been dragged into this, especially since the 25% imports on steel and aluminum have been placed on all foreign countries and not just Canada. The EU has responded with criticism and reciprocal tariffs. They recently announced retaliatory tariffs on $28 billion worth of different U.S. goods which were imported to Europe, like boats, motorbikes, and alcohol. European countries have said that the new tariffs are unjustified and that they would implement further countermeasures by April. But Trump recently said that he will negotiate a broader trade agreement with the UK, although that didn't help them escape the latest tariffs. The European Union is following the trend of Canada to fight against the U.S. with other tariffs. Investors have seen major stock indexes fall sharply in recent weeks. The S&P 500 is already down by almost 9% from its February high. Canada's bold move shocked the U.S., and nobody saw this coming, especially with the latest tariffs and threats to cut off the electricity completely. How long will this tariff war last, and what would it take for it to stop? We're not sure about that yet, but let us know your thoughts in the comments.